thank you for joining us here today at Fair Talk by Fair Farms. My name is Amanda Higgins. Today I'm excited to be joined by our special guest speaker, Mr. Neil Salvador from NS8 Lawyers and Advisors. Neil, welcome.
Thank you, Amanda. That's a mouthful, I know, but you did well.
Thank you very much. It's wonderful to have you here and joining us on the show.
It's a pleasure.
I'm excited to be talking about all things legal farm safety.
I'm glad you are, because not many people are. So it's actually good to be able to talk to you about it.
Yeah, wonderful, good. But before we get there, Neil, you're a principal advisor and a director of a law firm, but you're also an award-winning university lecturer. Tell us a bit about that.
Well, so I lecture at RMIT and I lecture in our law faculty. I do that. I got a phone call from RMIT wanting me to do a little bit of work for them, not really knowing what that was about, but they said that they wanted me to lecture on employment law, so I did that.
I bet, are you kind of still doing that now?
Yes, in fact, I've just finished because it's very difficult to keep up with everything that's happening.
Many changes.
But anyway, so I did that, and I didn't know how all this works. And what had happened was the students, I think there was about 35, 40 students, they did a survey, and to qualify for this, I think it was 90% of the students had to fill in the survey, and then 90% had to mark me as, I don't know,
wonderful.
Excellent or something.
Oh,
but
yeah.
And yeah, so that's what happened. They rang and said congratulations, and I didn't know what it was about, to be honest. And
good on you. Well,
yeah.
I've seen you speak on stage beforehand, and I think I would cast my vote your way as well.
Thank you. I appreciate
That's
it.
all
Thanks.
right. You're very welcome. So we'll get on to the serious stuff.
Okay.
And from your experience, and you've worked in this ag space for quite some time now, particularly in the
Yes.
safety aspect of it, why is it that agriculture has a disproportionate number of fatalities than the rest of businesses within Australia?
Well, I mean, if we think about the statistics, and if you think about that, so Australia's agriculture industry represents 2% of Australia's GDP, 2% of Australia's workforce, yet accounts for roughly 25% of all workplace fatalities. So those numbers in itself are disproportionate. And when you look at the 25% of those fatalities, 75% of those, roughly, are related to single vehicle incidents, which means any time that there are tractors, forklifts, trucks, trailers, mobile plants around horticulture or agriculture and people, the risk of something happening is certainly increased.
It's huge.
And that's what the statistics say. And all the matters that we've dealt with from a practical perspective is exactly that. That's what we see regularly. So in terms of those numbers, the theoretical numbers and the practical perspective, certainly from my perspective, is in line. And so I guess
numbers don't lie.
They really don't lie. Now, and I think to answer your question, why does that happen? Well, I think that there's a number of factors. We're involved in a project with WorkSafe, and some of the preliminary data that we're seeing is from all the surveys that are conducted. Surveys are conducted with farm owners and also with the workers. What we're seeing with those surveys is really very interesting, because the farm owners, and when I say farm owners, some are large farms, so 200 plus employees, and some have 10 employees, so that the size of the farm varies.
Scale's huge.
Nonetheless, the survey numbers are very similar, and what the survey results are showing is that the farm owners, they believe that they can do more to improve work safety. They think that in some circumstances that they're not too bad, but they can do a lot more. However, the workers, their view is that farm safety is fantastic. So you have this view from the farm owners saying we can do a lot better, and then the workers are saying, no, this is really pretty good. And then when you look at the workers, they come from areas such as the subcontinent, Asian regions, and we know that some of the safety practices there are not so good.
So that's why they've got this perceived expectation or this perceived thought that it's actually pretty good on farm compared to what it was at home.
Exactly right.
Gotcha.
So you see
There's
this.
a cultural learning difference.
It is. So you see that sometimes, and we see this regularly when we're on farms, you see workers go and engage in practices that in normal standards you would think is grossly unacceptable. But for the worker, from a cultural perspective, well, that's what they've been accustomed to. And so it doesn't surprise me when I see these statistics and I see what happens on a regular basis.
Yeah. So the mobile plant that is the, I suppose, at the forefront of these fatalities and most accidents, why is that occurring? Is it lack of training in the use of that? Why is it that mobile plant and equipment are at the forefront of those accidents?
Well, I think it's a number of reasons. One of those is, they're big, large pieces of equipment. So if people aren't aware of the risks around being around that mobile plant, then the risk of something happening is quite heightened. So when we think about all the activities that happen around mobile plant, more often than not, there are people around them. So whether that means they are harvesting near large tyres or they're working right near tractors, they're in areas like packing facilities where there's forklifts moving around quite quickly. Without any systems and processes in place, there's a lot of luck that's involved in making sure that people are safe. And that's where there's problems.
Well, that's right. They're heavy pieces of equipment and they move.
Yeah, exactly.
So
That's right.
It's really what it is, isn't it?
And then you throw people into that mix as well.
The more unpredictable than anything.
Exactly, yes.
So other than that, what are some of the critical risks that you see on farms that you've had experience with? What are some other the real critical areas that people need to be aware of or be mindful of?
Look, I think there's two that come to mind. One of those is guarding. So guarding on equipment is very, very important.
Don't take it off to try and make something more efficient. Leave it on there. It's there for a reason.
Exactly. And well, the other thing is there's a lot of equipment that farmers are generally quite intuitive, and they're also untrammelled in their approach, their working habits. So they look at ways that they can be innovative. And what that sometimes means is they create their own equipment. And sometimes things like guarding are not considered through that process. And so again, we've certainly dealt with a number of farms and a number of incidents where people have been injured because there hasn't been any guarding in place. And so that's certainly something that comes to mind, particularly when there's equipment that is associated with large mobile plant as well. That's one that stands out. The other one that stands out is really about exclusion zones. So this is making sure that there are safe zones for people and operators to work in.
So like a traffic management plan?
Exactly.
Pedestrian access versus forklift
Exactly,
access?
yes. So that's and again, if we think about the industrial manslaughter cases that have been run in Australia, there have been 3 so far, 2 in Queensland, 1 in Victoria. All 3 have involved forklifts. So again, the statistics around this mobile plant, forklift and people is right in front of us.
That's right. It's a danger that we need to be aware of constantly, and we need to have management processes in place to do something about it.
And I think there's one step before that too, Amanda, and that is that it's so important that people have the appropriate training and education and inductions. And when you're embarking on a safety approach, it needs to start right from the start. And that is, as soon as an employee starts, they need to be aware of what these risks are. They need to be aware of what controls are in place to minimise those risks.
Yeah, that's right. I think a lot of businesses out there think, where on earth does it start and where on earth does it finish? As a business owner, I know I have obligations, but where do I start and does it ever end?
It's a great question, and often farmers are overwhelmed by that very thought. And they're also overwhelmed with the thought of the cost that's involved.
Time is money.
Yes, yes. And the law says that you need to do everything that is reasonably practicable to keep people safe.
So can we talk about that definition for a sec?
Yes.
In legal terms, what does that mean?
Well, look, in its most simplest form, it means you need to consider cost, you need to consider expertise, you need to consider resources. All these facts need to be considered. And I guess an example of that would be an organisation such as BHP. If they had to spend $2,000 to make something safe and they don't do that, then that is not a reasonable approach to do what they needed to do.
Yeah.
On the other hand, if it is a very small farm, $2,000 might be a lot of money for that farm, but can they do something else to try and minimise the risk? So that definition varies depending on all
Right.
these
So it's
facts.
not applicable, it's overlaid, but it's relatable in the context of the business.
Yes.
Okay.
And I guess the crux of that, Amanda, is that there needs to be evidence of attempts to minimise that risk. And not just attempts, but tangible, real evidence that there has been measures in place to minimise risk. That's what it's all about.
Yeah, that's right. Harm minimisation, risk assessments, talking,
Exactly.
consultation with the workers who are actually doing the job. I think.
Absolutely. It's so important because often you will have people that will make decisions about safety that have never even done the task themselves.
Yeah.
Or would walk past and say, look, that's a risk, let's get this in place, but really it's not going to work. So that consultation is so important, and it doesn't take much. It doesn't take a lot to engage, and it's not only just a legal requirement, but it makes people's jobs easier if they know what those risks are from the people that are actually doing the task.
And I think that is important, isn't it, in driving a safety culture where you can have conversations with the people doing the actual job because
Yes.
they know better than anybody.
Exactly.
And they'll feel valued, they'll feel
Exactly.
heard.
Yes.
Because I'm sure that businesses out there want their people to go home safe.
Oh, exactly. And all the farms and all the environments that we assist people with, I don't think there's been one person that has said, oh, I'm not that interested in safety. I'm not interested in keeping people safe. That is not the intention. And particularly in the smaller farm environments where there's, say, 10 employees or less, these people are not just employees. These people are really
Like
close.
family.
Yeah, they're like family. So it
They
is...
work beside them every day.
Exactly.
They know their kids' names.
Exactly, yes.
Yeah.
So it is more than just ticking a box from a legal perspective. It's far more than that. So the intent is never to hurt anyone. It is that many people don't know where to start and don't know where to finish. But
So where do they start? What's some practical advice on where to start? Because I think if you look at it and you perhaps maybe have not a lot of sophisticated systems, you look at the scope of work and you think, I've got no idea where to begin. It's so huge.
oh, absolutely,
What do I do?
yeah, absolutely. Look, my advice would be to think about those statistics. We know that anything where there is mobile plant,
Yeah.
the risk is higher.
So
that
start
someone's-
there?
I would absolutely start there.
Right.
And it starts with a risk assessment. Again, you can Google all this information, and it doesn't have to be an overly complex process. It's a simple process to understand, is there a risk that someone can get hurt doing this task? If there is, what can I do to minimise that individual getting hurt? Now that could be simple. There are simple things that could be done, and often when we say, look, a traffic management plan is what you need to do, people think immediately about the cost that's involved, but it doesn't have to be costly. It can be very simple. Things like having bollards in certain areas and doing training around that, and making sure
Line
people
marking even.
Yeah, exactly,
Just-
exactly.
Yeah, even some tape on the floor temporarily until
Exactly.
you and work out whether that actually works. or not.
Exactly, yes. So we've gone to many environments where we would recommend doing that risk assessment, and it may end up being you have directional arrows with tape. That's the direction the forklift will be going. That's an exclusion zone for forklifts. So these simple things, you don't have to spend a lot of money on that.
Yeah.
But it's not as bad as what you think. It really isn't.
So tackle it with the priority stuff, the stuff that was
Yes.
that is a high risk area,
Yes,
plant and
yes,
mobile equipment,
yes.
and then work your way back. And,
Yes.
and I heard you say earlier on that training was really critical in this.
Very important.
So I suppose it comes down to having some systemised training, perhaps, whether it be inductions or refresher training. I
Absolutely.
think that's probably
Absolutely. Look, I think that, and it's easy to say also training, you need to do training, but it's got to be meaningful training. The other hurdle that many farmers have to overcome is the fact that a lot of their workers, English is not their first language. So the question then about training is, well, how effective is that training going to be?
how do they do it?
Well, WorkSafe Victoria, and I know the other states have it as well, they have guidance materials on this. It's about communicating across language barriers. And there are simple things that can be done. So rather than have, as an example, a toolbox meeting where an individual is talking for 15 minutes on something, that can be done through images and videos.
Yeah.
So just really simple, clear symbols and even pictures about what's acceptable and what's not acceptable. And we've done this with a lot of farms. In fact, a farm not too far from here, all their workers did not understand one word of English, and they had 15 workers on their farm. They're working around tractors and mobile plant, and so
The concerns straight away.
yeah, absolutely. They're ticking all the boxes in terms of, oh, geez, this is high risk.
Yeah.
So for us, we put in place an induction for them, and that induction was made up of simple images,
Yeah.
and it was just a tick. as to-
Infographics.
Exactly,
Yep.
that's all it
yes,
was.
do this, and a big cross, no, don't do that.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And that farmer now uses that on a regular basis and gets people to sign off so they understand what those risks are. So they're simple messages.
Yeah. It's all very well and good to have training and to be communicating it, but unless it's understood,
Oh, it's so
and I think
important.
that's the other factor, isn't it? It's all, you could have all of the manuals in the world,
Yeah,
but if people
absolutely.
can't read them
Yes,
or
yes.
don't understand them, then they're not effective.
They're of no value, exactly. It's a bit like, when someone starts in an employment, in a new job, I'm sure that they get hundreds of pieces of paper and
And
in
how do you
15
remember them
minutes,
all the
they're expected to
policies?
sign all these things. No, they don't understand that. But safety is so important because you need to get these things right.
You do. It's fundamental.
It is.
It's fundamental to having a successful business. You've got reputational damage
Exactly.
should stuff go wrong.
That's exactly
You've now
right.
got industrial manslaughter charges that come into play.
Exactly,
And it's
yes.
a hard monetary cost.
It is. It
Premiums go
really
up
is.
and then there's fines.
It really is. And it's one of those things also, you go to court and you just don't know where you're going to end up.
Yeah.
So you could get a conviction, you could face significant fines.
Yeah.
So there's the risk of not knowing where that is going to end up. So you're far better served to try and deal with these things on your terms. And those terms are things like setting up those little safety systems that can be managed in terms of cost, and you control when and how those things
Yeah.
happen.
Yeah. So I think the message here is do some bite-sized chunks,
Absolutely.
but keep on
Yes.
moving forward.
Yes, yes.
And keep
yes.
on moving forward. So the intent is to always be progressive in that space.
Absolutely. Yes.
So do you see as an industry that we're getting better in ag, in hort? Is the industry wanting to do better in your experience? You're obviously out there dealing with a number of farmers, you're representing a number of people in court.
Yes, absolutely. There is, I think, certainly probably the last 5 years, I think there's been a significant positive shift. There are, we certainly receive more phone calls about what can we do to make our farm and our people safer than what we ever have.
Yeah, that's fabulous.
And I don't know whether that's come about through social media and newspaper articles and things that people hear on TV, but there is certainly an appetite to try and make a difference. And it varies, Amanda. Some people are keen to do whatever they have to do to get to where they need to, but some have there are commercial implications about this as well. So some might say, look, can we develop a plan about how we deal with this, and we tackle those on a monthly or weekly basis. So
Put it in a
it's-
project management plan and
Exactly.
roll it out. It can't all
Yes.
be done at once.
Yes,
Don't
yes.
try to.
Yeah, exactly.
I think the other thing is it's all very well and good to develop it, but then start to embed it and implement it and create that culture along the way.
It's absolutely the key.
Don't
If you
stick
can-
it in the third drawer.
Exactly, and if it becomes part of your business practices, that it's, and that starts with walkways as a classic example. If you have walkways, and as a leader in the business, if you are using those walkways, and again, I talk about walkways because there are so many circumstances as human beings. I know I certainly think about this.
So
If I-
quite literally, don't cut the corner.
yeah, exactly. Yeah,
Quite literally, don't cut the
and,
corner.
And there are so many times where I know it's easier for me to walk 5 steps that way than what it is 50 steps that way.
Yeah.
But there's risk involved in that, and so again, if you embed these practices by doing it yourself, or leaders doing it, or making sure that people in your business are doing that, then what you're doing is you're improving your safety culture, and that's very, very important.
Yeah, yep. So I think that's a really key insight, isn't it? That leaders and managers need to demonstrate good behaviours,
Absolutely.
and they need to have safety in the forefront. I mean, they don't have to talk about it all the time, but the way you act and the way you behave is going to convey whether you think safety is important or not.
Absolutely, yes, absolutely.
So what are some other insights that are practical that you can give to some of our viewers who are the business owners or they're farm managers out there? Are there some key takeaways that you can sort of think of off the top of your head?
Look, I have to say, every single safety matter, every time we've represented someone in court, every single incident, I know this is cliche, I know it, but every one of them are avoidable, every single one of them. And I often think to myself, if conversations took place with the workers about some of these matters, would that have occurred? And my instincts and my experience is telling me that probably not.
Yeah.
Probably not. So
Preventable, highly preventable.
absolutely. So it is so important that there are ears on the ground and you understand what those risks are. And you do that by talking to people.
Yeah.
So consulting on a regular basis. And that doesn't have to be
Should you document that, Neil?
Yeah,
Do you need to formalise it in some way, I suppose?
Yeah, look, there's the legal obligation to do that.
Yeah.
And again, I don't know about your memory, but mine is not so good in
Mine's
terms
certainly
of
not so good.
of remembering all these things that you have to deal with. So it is far easier to document,
Yeah,
have
have a
something in writing.
checklist.
Exactly. It really doesn't take much, but I understand that it would be so overwhelming for many people to start on something where they just don't know where it starts, where it finishes, and what to do. But it really is not as bad as what you think. The first step is to talk to your team and to document what those issues are, and
And then
put
do
a measure
something
in.
about
Exactly.
Then do something about them. Once you
Exactly.
know about them, actually take action. I would imagine in court cases that there's been evidence where an employee has come to another manager or supervisor and said, this has occurred. It's been documented that there's been a conversation, but there's been no further action taken. I don't imagine that the courts would look too kindly.
no, not at all.
that.
Not at all. Look, one of critical areas that the courts would examine is ought to have known and should have known better. And so if you have an officer or really a farm manager or business owner, it's implied that they have some level of competence, and having some level of competence really is about knowing what that task is, and therefore knowing what some of those risks are. So if you know about some of those risks and don't do anything about it, in court it's certainly not a good look at all. So again, it just comes back to those basic things, by having those simple conversations, by documenting what's been said, and just putting a plan together about how you deal with that.
So when should farms and farm managers start embarking on the safety journey? It's never going to be too early, is it?
No, no. Look, I have to say, as soon as you have interactions with people and plant, then you must have something in place. And again, it doesn't have to be sophisticated, but there needs to be something in place. Because people look for a system, people look for something that they need to follow. So if you're providing that direction, well, you're halfway there.
And it's consistency then too, isn't it? Do you
It
know what I
is.
mean? It's if you can develop something that everybody can understand and everybody has the ability to abide by, then when
Yes.
someone doesn't, another colleague or another team member can say, hey, that's not the way you do that, and have that conversation with their co-worker,
Exactly.
which can then prevent.
That's exactly right. And that's where you want to get to. If you're having those, if people in your business are having those conversations, well, that's something good is happening. Something really good is happening.
Yeah, that's right. I think people really are afraid to record those near misses and stuff,
Yes.
but they're a good indicator
absolutely.
of what on earth it is you need to be paying attention
Yes,
to. The
exactly.
bigger that list, the better, I reckon.
Absolutely, I agree. But people are reluctant to do that. But
Yeah, they're scared, I suppose, that it just means more work.
exactly. But it is so important because then you have some data and statistics that support why you're making these changes in the first place. So
Yeah.
absolutely, they're
And
very important.
Complacency is no excuse.
No, not at all.
No.
Not at all.
No. So how does the law treat those who breach their safety obligations? We know it's not an excuse, and we know that ignorance is not an excuse either. You can't say I didn't know about it. There's
Yes.
plenty of codes of practice out there, and if there's a code of practice, I'm of the understanding that a court may rely upon that as a certain level or a
Yes,
certain standard
that's
that a
exactly
business needs
right.
to meet.
Well, there's different enforcement approaches. So I guess in the first instance, it could be that WorkSafe Victoria, as an example, would come on site and may issue an improvement notice.
Right.
So that's a notice to simply say that certain tasks need to be completed by a certain date. They could issue prohibition notices, which means the entire operation needs to stop until a certain action has taken place. And in the extreme cases, there could be a prosecution. And a prosecution, in most cases, certainly in Victoria, prosecution is dealt with through the Crimes Act, so it's a criminal matter.
Criminal offence.
So with that, in the first instance, you would appear in the magistrate's court if it's nothing too serious. That might involve a criminal conviction. And what people need to remember here is that if you get a criminal conviction, there are some countries that don't allow you into their country. So that's one thing to bear in mind. But there's
Not
also,
even thought of, I wouldn't imagine. Do you know what I mean? That you might not be able to travel because of a workplace incident.
exactly. That's
People-
right.
The people wouldn't make that connection, I
Yes,
think.
yes. So there's that, and then there's also fines as well. So there's fines could be substantial, ranging from we've certainly been in cases where the fines have been 2,000, some have been 15.
I saw some. I
45.
saw some that were 50,000.
Yes. Oh, there's there's 200, 300. So
Yeah.
it's
But
depending
they-
on the offence.
Absolutely.
But yeah, they're dealt with. People forget this, but they're dealt with in a criminal fashion. So it's those criminal guidelines that are used in court, the criminal precedences that are used in court.
Yeah, gosh. So it's certainly, don't underestimate the importance of safety and the impact that a preventable accident could have on your business.
Yes.
Financially,
Yes.
reputationally, and let alone the personal.
Oh, exactly,
effect, the
exactly.
personal impact
We've
on the person it's affected and the business owners and the workers.
Absolutely. We've dealt with so many matters where someone has been seriously injured and out of action for 8, 12 months. And the farmer, we've sat there on their dining tables with the family, and it's been a very emotional time. Not just emotional for the family because of what's taken place, but they're upset for the individual.
Yeah.
They're upset for the individual's families because, again, these people are close with them. So there's all these things that sit outside the law that cause these emotional drains. And again, this can be avoided by just doing some of these simple measures.
Do Do you think people rush too much? Is it that they're time poor, or they'll get to it another day, or that they'll talk to that person when they've come back from harvesting that paddock over there, and then they'll just hold that thought over there for a minute. I'll talk to you about that protector guard in a second when I get back, and all of a sudden it's too late.
Well, it's, you know what, it's again, it's easy to sit here and say to do all these things, but we have been working with farms for many years, and we've been on the ground, we've been on tractors, on harvesting units, and they're under a lot of pressure. The supervisors, team leaders, managers, they're under a lot of pressure. They need to harvest, they need to get this packed, they need to get it out to the distribution centre, the truck's waiting. So there's all these pressures, but and when these things occur, again, there's a greater risk of something happening, but the way around that is to have these sound systems in place, sound safety systems where people know, no matter how busy you are, you don't walk in this area where there's a lot of forklift activity, or you don't walk in front of the tractor when it's moving. So there's these simple things, but if you can embed these systems in place, when you're busy, people will follow these appropriate systems.
Yeah, it becomes default.
Exactly.
It becomes default.
That's
the way it should be.
what you want. Exactly right.
That's what it should be.
Yes.
So how do we have the conversation with business owners when there's this is a costly exercise to improve safety on farm? It's costly in the way of monetary costs. It's costly in my time. I'm not going to get a return on investment.
Yes.
What's your conversation with them if that's an argument they want to propose to you?
Yeah, look, and again, this is a sign that I think this industry is changing, because that they were the conversations many years ago, but those conversations have shifted.
Excellent.
So I think there's been some wonderful progress in that area. But when those conversations did occur, my view was always, like I said earlier, that if something goes wrong, you get to court. The outcome of that is out of our control, because it depends on the magistrate, depends on the circumstances. So there's a variety of different variables that we will have to deal with. That could range from a conviction through to a hefty fine. So you are better served to try and control the environment that you can, and that is by doing things in small bites, by having a plan of attack, by having a safety action plan as an example, and that's done by assessing risks firstly, identifying those risks that are going to cause the greatest risk to individuals, greatest harm to individuals, and then you work down through that list. So again, by dealing with that in small chunks, you are, without knowing it, you are working through a good safety management plan.
Yeah, that's wonderful. When you're inviting other workers onto farms through a labour hire provider, for example, and we know that there's an obligation for a host employer, as well as there's certainly obligations for the employer, being the LHP.
Yes.
What's your advice, and where do the twain meet in regards to that liability and obligation, and what needs to be undertaken when you're engaging with labour hire workers?
Well, there is a legal obligation for both parties to consult. So both parties have to consult about the risks and the controls. So often you will hear, we certainly hear, oh look, the labour hire person has sent someone in and we have to deal with it. And most farms, they do deal with it. But what labour hire companies need to understand, the Act says that there needs to be consultation between both parties. So my view, my advice in that space is to ensure that when a labour hire company is engaged, that there is evidence that there's been consultation between both parties, that the labour hire company is aware of the risks that their employee is going to be involved, exposed to, and
does that mean that they do a pre-engagement meeting perhaps, and do a walkthrough of the facilities and say, tell me what the job role is, instead of perhaps it just being over the telephone or
absolutely.
You know, is that the ideal scenario? And
absolutely.
we don't live in a perfect world, so how do we mitigate that risk?
Well, that's absolutely the way to do it. In best practice, that's what you need to do. They need to understand that if there's 10 new people that can't speak English that are going to be harvesting, well, what has the labour hire company done to certainly make the individual aware of those risks and what the controls are? And then there's also an obligation on the host employer to do the same thing. But it should not be wholly and solely with the host employer.
No, the obligations are on both parties.
Exactly, yes.
Yeah, that's
Now, we often talk about the obligations always resting with the employer, but in the OHS Act, there are obligations on employees as well.
Of course.
And not to engage in anything that is going to cause harm or risk.
They have a duty of care to
Absolutely.
themselves and others,
Yes.
I think, is the
So
wording.
again, we've had many cases where there have been employees that have engaged in very unsafe practices, particularly after large periods of training. So, and
Does that factor into contributory negligence in
Yes.
that respect?
Yes,
where
absolutely.
an employee has undertaken training, the business has done as much as they possibly can,
Yes,
you know,
yes.
without shackling themselves to that employee.
Yes.
And the employee's gone and contributed to their own incident or
exactly,
accident.
yes, yes.
So they're not following the processes themselves.
That's
Or
exactly
they're not
right.
engaged in it.
Exactly, and they've been trained, they know what to do, they know how to do it, and they choose not to do it, put themselves at risk.
Yeah.
It's exactly right.
Yeah, gosh. So there is obligations on all three parties. In that labour hire side of things, it's the labour hire, the host employer and the employees.
Yes, yes.
Direct hire is employees and employers.
Exactly right, yes.
Yeah, no,
yes.
that's a shared responsibility really
It is.
when we look at it.
It really is. It really is.
No, that's fabulous. So have you got 3 to 4 pieces of advice that you would like to leave our viewers with as to what they can perhaps do or implement or that might be top of mind for you that you see as very practical for them to be able to action?
Look, I would think first, again, we think about the statistics. Anything around mobile plant presents a risk. So that would require some understanding of what those risks are. So that's a risk assessment.
Talk to the operators?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So you talk to the operators, understand what those risks are, and do something about that. And that could be, it doesn't have to be, you don't have to spend large amounts of money. That could be through developing an exclusion zone or a simple traffic management plan, as an example. It could be about having guarding on planting units, as an example. Having seat belts on planting units, as an example. These are little things that can be done. And by doing that, you're meeting your obligation by consulting, by undertaking risk assessments, recording how you've achieved that, and then put some training in place. So if there's 3 or 4 tips that I would give to people, that would be it. Do the consultation, the risk assessment, record and train.
Yeah.
And supervision as well.
And supervision. Do what is reasonable and practicable.
Exactly.
To,
yes.
to execute your duties
Exactly.
as a PCBU.
Yes.
You know, because at the end of the day, it's going to save you a whole lot less or a whole lot more heartache than ending up.
Absolutely.
And
yes.
the emotional toll we know would be absolutely catastrophic on some businesses and,
it is.
and
It
families.
really is. Yes,
Yeah.
it really
so
is.
So prevention is much better than
Oh,
cure.
absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. Neil, Salvador, thank you so much for
Pleasure.
your time.
Thank you.
It's been wonderful to have you here. Thank you to everybody who has joined us online. We really appreciate you tuning into Fair Talk by Fair Farms. We look forward to seeing you at the next episode, and bye for now.